Hi, and welcome back. Today I'm going to show you how I built the Wolfboro freight house from Motrak models. And this kit is in N scale. Jeff Adam, the owner of Motrak Models, was kind enough to donate this to our Model Railroad Club. We have a portable N scale layout that we take to shows with us to promote the scholarship fund that our club offers. So let me show you what comes in the kit. First, you get a very thorough package of instructions with color photographs of the kit and the original building. The box also includes laser cut walls and strip wood for the foundation and for the platform, and tissue windows and shingles. Now, Jeff's kits often have an inner and outer wall, and this cuts down on any warpage. So my first step was to glue the inner and outer walls together. First I did the end walls, making sure that the ridges lined up. And then I did the side walls, again lining up the top edge because you have a little bit of an overhang on the bottom. And then once I had all of my walls put together, it was time to decide how to paint them. I tried a couple different shades of red that I had to see what I liked and what matched the original building. I ended up picking a Tuscan red, and I thinned it a little bit with Liquitex Flow Aid. And this allows you to brush it on without heavy coverage. Then I painted the inside of my walls a flat black. I learned this trick from Thomas Farrell. And then once they were dry on both sides, I went over the outer walls with a little bit of driftwood stain from Hunterline. Next, I took the plastic windows and I coated them with a spray of Tamiya light gray. Then I used a sponge and sponged on a light application of ivory. By keeping it light, a little bit of the gray shows through, looking like worn wood. I also used the ivory on the corner trim and the freight doors, and then went over those with a little bit of the driftwood stain. Then I went ahead and glued the corner trim onto my end walls and trimmed them to fit flush. And the same trim was used around the freight doors, and again I just cut it to fit and glued it in place. Now, one little trick that I learned from my friend Dick at HO Scale Rio Grande in the San Luis Valley is you can use the light bulbs that come with Tichy lamps for doorknobs. I usually tend to use Tichy rivets for that, but in this case one of the HO Scale light bulbs turned out to be just the right size for a doorknob in N scale, and this was for the office door. Then I started putting the freight doors in place, and I had to cut the transoms from the strip wood that came with the kit to fit in. The kit comes with laser cut acetate for your glazing for the windows, so next I glued that in using an extra thin Tamiya glue, and then started gluing the windows into the walls, just using regular white glue. Then I put my walls together. As usual, I put two L shapes together and then glued those together into the complete building. Now I used an ivory spray paint for the underside of the roof decking. Then before applying the shingles, I went over them with some Copic markers to get different shading. Unfortunately, I regret that I didn't go in a vertical direction, and I thought it would be more random once I put them on. But it is what it is. And I started putting the shingles on. With diamond cut shingles, the important thing is to line up the points with the valleys of the previous row. And let me tell you, in N scale, it's a test of your eyes. But I was able to glue them all in place pretty well. But again, I regret the direction the streaking was going in. Gluing the shingles on tends to pull the roofing slightly in that direction. So I came up with this arrangement of weights to hold the roofing flat while I was gluing the building onto it, and it worked well. And then when I got to gluing the other side on, I didn't need to be quite as fancy. Just weighting it like this worked, and both pieces of roofing were glued on. Then I went ahead and cut a piece of strip wood for a ridge pole, and this fills in the valley in between the two pieces of roofing. This allows me to put my last row of shingles going all the way up to the very top. If you don't do something like this, you run the risk of your ridge cap not coming all the way down and covering the last row of shingles. And you can see here how the last row of shingles are on that strip of wood that I put in, and how the ridge cap comes all the way down and covers them the way it would with real shingles. Now I started working on the support for the building, and you had two pieces of wood, one for the actual supports and one for the bracing. And this is where I got myself in a little trouble, as you'll see later. I cut the posts to the correct length and glued them in place according to where the instructions show. And this is where the overhang of the outer wall really helps. You can see the posts glued in place here, and by having that outer wall there, it gives them more glue area. Now I started cutting the braces that were going to support the posts. I cut all of my pieces of wood to length, but had to cut a 45-degree angle on both ends. Well, I did this a couple of times, and then I went back to my old axiom, which is if you have to do the same thing more than 6 times, make a jig. So I just used a couple pieces of styrene scrap. I cut the piece at a 45-degree angle, glued them onto another piece with the correct spacing. And now I had a jig to cut all of my supports to the correct 45-degree angle. And then it was an easy matter to glue all of those in place. While I was letting those dry, I turned my attention to the chimney. I first gave it a spray coating of a dull red. Then I used some of the Roberts brick mortar. This stuff works really well in smaller scales where your recesses aren't very deep. And once it dried and I wiped off a couple of coatings, it came out pretty nice. Now I started working on the actual freight platform itself. And as I say, the kit comes with plenty of strip wood for this. The first thing I did was cut the planks down to the correct length to fit in a little dish that I have for putting on a stain. And then I used driftwood stain on the top planks. And I let them dry, and then I started cutting them down to length. Now the instructions told me how many I needed, but I didn't really keep count, and I think I ended up with a few more than I really needed. But I'll find uses for those in another project. Then I used a Thai brown stain on the platform supports. These are the posts and the bracing. And I put a piece of double-sided tape down on the instructions, which had a to scale diagram. And once I put down my supports, I started gluing the decking onto that. I had a piece of wood that I also had stuck to the tape that I used as the backing, which is where it would go up against the freight house. And this goes fairly quickly. After it was dry, I built the platform that goes at the end, which is a separate piece. And it was the same process. Then I turned them over and started gluing the bracing that goes on the underside. And this is the cross bracing that the feet are going to attach themselves to. And this is where I started realizing I might have made a mistake. You see, Jeff's kit is designed for track that's sitting on the ground, such as a freight yard. But our N-scale layout, we unfortunately had the freight tracks raised on cork, so they're the height of main line. And I started realizing that my platform was not going to be at the correct height for unloading boxcars or anything else. And I said, oops. So I had to come up with a solution. The solution, of course, was to raise the freight house. I was not about to rip off all of those posts and supports that I had put on. They looked too nice. So I said, I'll just build a base that goes underneath those. And then I went ahead and covered it with some of the textured brick paper that you can get. And it makes it look like a foundation that the posts had been built upon. I glued the textured paper onto the foundation support that I built. And once that was dry, I just cut the little spaces where the posts on the building were going to go into. And it was easy enough to glue the building onto this foundation that I had made. And it looks a little odd, but I made it work. And then I just had to adjust the length of all of the feet that I was going to be using on the platform. So once I figured that out, I cut all of my support legs and started gluing them in place. And it also comes with all the wood that you need for the cross bracing as well. And he put on a few and checked it underneath the thresholds of the doors, and it was at the correct height now. So I continued gluing all of my support posts and all of bracing on. And once it was done, I had pretty much solved my problem. Now, one thing you're looking for when you're dealing in small pieces like this is consistency. And I was happy that once I had all of the bracing in place, you could actually look straight through and not see anything out of place. And this is easy in O scale and HO scale. In N scale, it was a bit of a challenge, and I was happy with how it came out. So now it was just a matter of gluing the platform onto the building. And I had to adjust the length of the support posts for the other platform as well, which goes on the end of the building. So I started gluing the legs on this. And one little template that I made, which had straight lines on it, I was able to put up against the feet, and that helped me ensure that they were sticking straight up. And again, after I had glued all of the support posts in place, I glued the cross bracing in. And then I glued it onto the end of the building. Now it was time to start on the stairs and the steps. Since I had raised my platform, the stringers that came with the kit weren't long enough. But Jeff gives you some extras. Thanks, Jeff. So putting the steps on the end of the main platform was easy. Then I started working on the steps where I had put the two pieces of stringer together. I put down a piece of tape and stuck those to it, and this made it fairly easy to glue all of my steps onto the stringers. If I had had extra, I'd have put a third one in the middle, but it wasn't necessary. And once those were dry, I glued them onto the platform, and I also glued a support onto the bottom because this kit is going to be moved on and off of the layout a fair bit, and that strengthens them because I glued that support to the foundation. Now, one thing I like to put on buildings that I have bathrooms in is a vent pipe. It's something that I tend to do on almost every building that I build, and I just used a piece of Plastruct tubing for this. And then I started putting together the lights that come with the kit, and you get two small tissue castings and a piece of wire. And I just bent the wire and glued the castings onto the end of it. And then after painting, I drilled holes into the wall and glued them in place. The instructions show one over the door, but since I had two, I put another one at the other end of the building. And one thing I decided to do to kind of help hide that foundation I had to make was put a lot of scenery elements around it to make it look like weeds growing. And this helped make it not look quite so out of the ordinary. I like to use gallery glass around the chimney and vent pipe to act as sealant. Now I had a number of small N-scale detail pieces that I had gotten from Mud Creek models, and I wanted to have them scattered around on the platform and the decking. So I was trying out a new trick that I had learned from Randy Aleo, which is painting detail pieces using pan pastels and alcohol. And I had tested this out a couple times and really liked the results. You just put your pan pastels into something and spray some alcohol on them, and then brush it on, and they dry to a nice flat finish. And I used this technique for all of the detail pieces that I was putting on the platforms. I used a variety of colors, and I like how they all came out. So then I just glued them in place on the platform. And this is how the whole thing ended up. I'm happy with how it came out, even with the foundation that I had to add to it. I think if I had known ahead of time, I probably would have just made the posts longer, or I might have made a complete foundation for it. But either way, this is going to be a great addition to our club's N-scale layout. And if you're at one of the shows that we're at next time, be sure to look for it. And thank you for watching.